Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 5. We are almost at the end of this journey. You guys have all done such a great job so far. I'm really, really impressed with the level of your writing, your communication and discussion area. We started off after week 1 with a little bit of a bumpy road, but for now, at this point, you're all doing so great. And I wanted to congratulate you at that point up to this point. So this week is something near and dear to me. Obviously, if you've read any of my posts, you know that I have some extensive experience in corrections. As I mentioned in my original bio, I started off as a correctional officer. I worked in every area of my facility, it's a county correctional facility. It's the largest in the state of Massachusetts. And we hold roughly about 1,500 inmates, from jail inmates, which we've already covered, or pretrial detainees, all the way up to sentenced individuals. When I first started there, the county correctional facilities actually held state inmates. And so we didn't just have the misdemeanors, we had the felony convictions as well. As you know, the pretrial detainees, they're looking at either misdemeanors or felony convictions. So to get to the point is I've got some pretty good experience with regards to corrections, and so it helps with this week in developing courses related to rehabilitation and correctional practices and correctional history. So for this week, we're going to be talking about the evolution of corrections, both the physical design and the purpose of corrections, or prisons, and the legal concepts that are associated with that. So the evolution of prisons really basically got its groundbreaking. I mean, if you travel back all the way to the 14th, 15th centuries, they were using a correctional model, or a prison model. There weren't really any prisons per se. They were more like dungeons. If you move into the 16th century, 17th century, now you start to look at hulks and in warehouses, the ghouls. But when we start to think of modern prisons, in the purpose behind the putting people in these as a means of some level of punishment, we really need to start to think about, or back then they started to think about, well, what's the purpose of this? Why are we doing this? Are we just locking somebody up because we have the physical ability to do that, the power to do that? Or is there an end goal to this? And I'll step into the purposes of corrections in a couple minutes. But for right now, we need to really look at the groundbreaking work of Sir Walter Crofton and out of Ireland, and in Alexander Mackeny, the Australian model. And the idea of this was, we're locking these people up, but what incentive does the individual have to get out of the correctional facility or the prison? And those two individuals, specifically Alexander Mackeny, essentially set up the merit system. And we still use that merit system today. In Massachusetts, if you attend programs, engage in some type of educational activity, and stay disciplinary action free, meaning that you're not tampering with a locking device, getting in a fight, selling drugs, trying to bribe a correctional officer, variety of infractions that each individual has unique listings of. If you're not found guilty of those, then you get 10 days taken off your sentence for every month. So if you think about it, after a year, you get 120 days taken right off your sentence just for being a model inmate. And we can credit that good time, what we call it now, we can credit it back to Walter Crofton and Alexander Mackeny. So these are this was the groundbreaking change in corrections or prisons. What was the purpose of why we were sending individuals there? And what were we expecting the individuals to do? Was it to sit in their cell and stay quiet and read the Bible under similar to the penitentiary model of the Auburn or Pennsylvania system? Or were we looking for more? We were trying to prepare these individuals to re-enter society as fruitful members of society. So when we question what the purpose of prison really comes down to, is it about rehabilitation? Is it about incarcerating, locking somebody up and throwing away the key? Is it about restorative justice, or restoring the individual back to where they should be? Is it a deterrence for those of us around watching this so that we don't commit the same types of crime? Or is it simply retribution? An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, Lex telling us, you did this to me, and we're going to do this to you. And that's the basic of it. So we ask these questions every time we send somebody off to a correctional facility, or as the correctional models change. So it's really important to understand that corrections itself does not dictate what's going to change and how it's going to change. And a lot of people are under the misconception that corrections just throws a bunch of things against the wall and hoping that it's like spaghetti and something sticks. It's not that way. Correctional models change because society changes. So we could go back, I could spend a month on a lecture on crime trends out in the streets and historical relevance to those crime trends, and how we look at the increase or decrease in prison populations. There's a lot to do with data crunching on that. There's a lot of looking at the socioeconomics, the socio-political environment. There's a lot, and I can give you an example. From 1941 to 1945, the United States was engaged in World War II. We saw a dramatic decline in correctional facilities across the country. Well, obviously, because all the male able-bodied people, those aggressive 18 to 25-year-old males, were sent off to war. And there wasn't, the people that were home were engaged in the war effort. So a lot of people were engaged in busy, so the criminal activity was less of a draw. We can even go all the way back to, say, the Greek phalanxes. At age 12 to 13, all males were removed from the home and sent off to the military conscription, meaning that they were going for military training. You could not be a citizen unless you engaged in the military. Well, crime was really low in the cities. Why? Because all the aggressive 18 to 25-year-old males were off at war. We can start to do a lot of comparisons on this. So what happens when a country isn't at war and people are idle? My father used to say, idle hands are the devil's playground, meaning if you're not kept busy, you find yourself in trouble. Well, that goes true to 2021, 2022, or 2015. If we have individuals, children, adolescents that are not kept busy, they tend to get in trouble. Not because they're seeking trouble, they're just looking for entertainment. Well, how do we address that? When we look at the punishment, is an individual an addict, and is being an addict a criminal behavior, or is an addiction a biological, psychological, and sociological issue? So when we think of high addiction rates, is the answer to send them off to a correctional facility, or is it to think about rehabilitation models? When we think of, say, child molesters, and again, a topic that I can go deep into, an individual is a child predator, and they're attracted to children, just as, say, some 25-year-old male might be attracted to a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. Imagine telling that individual, listen, that you cannot speak to or be around women with blonde hair and blue eyes. That's just not going to happen. The individual is going to try their best, but they're always going to revert back to what their individual attraction is. We all have our own type, and a child molester might best be incarcerated because it's nearly impossible to change somebody's type. The restoration concept, is punishment about restoration? Well, we could debate that. If prior to the founding fathers set in modeling of the Bill of Rights and the laws that were created, and under common law, is a violation of common law, statutory law, or procedural law, or administrative law, whatever type of law, is that is it an act against the individual, or is it an act against the state? Well, the United States, when we set up our nation, we essentially said it's an act against the state. You don't violate the victim, you violate the state laws, which means that you violate all of us. I use the comparison of this when I'm in class with my students, and I point out one student, and I said, if I punch you right now, are you the victim or is everybody the victim? And the person's like, I'm the victim. You hit me, which he or she is right. They are the victim. But those that were in the classroom are also the victims in a different sense, because they signed on to a class in a college environment that they believed that was a safe, clear environment, that nothing was going to happen to them there, at least by their professor. So we can look at everybody as a victim, and the state in the country tends to look at it that way. Restorative models or restorative justice models tend to pull back from that and say, wait a second, yes, everybody's the victim, but the victim is the true victim. And when we think about punishment, should the offender repay the victim in some way, some possible method, means, whether it's monetary or whether it's labor services, whatever it be, should the offender somehow make the victim whole once again based upon their actions? And the last one is retribution. And that's that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I mentioned the lex talionis. It's a legal mumbo jumbo that goes along with the retribution model. Are we locking people up? I did forget one other one, deterrence. So are we locking people up based upon the need to just pay them back for what they did? I think that's more of a draconian response. It's not as humane. It's not as enlightened. And the last one that I skipped was deterrence. So deterrence is a great model for punishment. Does it work though? The idea is that if I slapped or spanked my child for a violation of some rule of my house, and the other children are around, would the other children learn from that child's mistake? We would hope, say yes, but we could use the death penalty as an example. Texas has one of the highest death row rates in the nation, and they have the highest murder rate in the country. You would assume that the death penalty would be used as a deterrence. Some people would argue that it's that way. Others would argue that there's a utilitarian response to it. But let's say that it's used as a deterrent. How is that factual when you say, like, the Northeast, that does not have a death penalty, has lower murder rates than Texas, and we don't put people to death? So this is that growing debate on whether the effectiveness of the death penalty, but whether or not is a deterrent. Now, I'm fine with an argument that it's retribution, then have at it. But making the argument that it deters, the evidence in the data doesn't support that. So moving on to the second part of the week, your writing assignment, is the legal considerations, the legal changes or the evolution of corrections. Prior to 1872, inmates really would make they really didn't know the legal rights. People took their punishments and simply just accepted them. They never really sought to look for legal challenges on cruel and unusual punishment, which is under the Eighth Amendment. And then that's where we really find most of our legal practice or case laws that are associated with corrections. So the point that I'm making is that when we look at, say, Ruffin versus Commonwealth 1872, this established the hands-off doctrine. And it's really what it was if an inmate, after the Supreme Court case was ruled on, said that the warden and their superintendents and the prison guards beat me on a regular basis, I feel that this is cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights. So what did the court do? Well, after this, the court basically said, we're not experts on correctional practices, prisons. We don't understand how to reform people. We're not in a position to answer this question. So we're not going to rule on it, which essentially made sheriffs, superintendents, and wardens the kings of their castle. They could essentially do whatever they wanted to any inmate. They could kill them essentially, and there were no legal actions against them. because the Supreme Court really just didn't know how to address this. They didn't know how to see it, and it was easier to just block that segment of society completely off. However, nearly 100 years later, a little bit over 100 years later, in 1974, Wolf versus McDonnell essentially said, you know what? There is no iron curtain between the U.S. Constitution and the prisoners of our country. In other words, these are our members of our country. While whether or not they've done something wrong or that they violated the law in some way, they're still members of our country and are due their Constitution Bill of Rights under every circumstance. So that's when the question came into how big can a cell be per individual? What does double occupancy look like? Should there be running water, natural light, the access to a legal library, access to medical care, access to electricity, an effective dietary plan that meets all of the criteria if you were outside on the streets that you would need. These are all the considerations that came in, and there's many, many more. The ability to represent themselves in court, their ability to attend arraignments and appearances in court. There's a variety of issues that were challenged. And essentially from 1974 onward, the floodgates opened up for roughly about maybe 6 years. And every inmate with every single grievance, keep in mind that there were a lot of grievances that needed to be repaired, but every grievance was brought to the court. Maybe not all of them made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, but we have to keep in mind that a perfect example is the 1972 Attica prison riot, the very first and worst riot in U.S. history, prison riot in U.S. history. All they were asking for was simple things, and it wasn't about hot soup like if you've ever seen the movie. It was really about representation. I mean, they weren't asking for a seat at the table, but they were asking for some kind of common sense items that if the prison's going to issue me socks and they'll wash my uniforms and they'll wash my underwear, why wouldn't they wash my socks? And if an inmate refused to wash their own socks in their room, then the inmate would be disciplined. And the discipline can range anywhere from a 24-hour lockdown, which is considered an informal lock-in, all the way up to 30 days, which means that you lose your canteen the prison store, and you lose visitation, and you lose your access to the law library. So if a prison official really wanted to shut somebody down and realized that, hey, this individual is making too much noise, and they've got some civil suits against us, we're just going to lock them in on some frivolous thing for 30 days, and then that'll put them back 30 days on their ability to research their case. So there's a variety of issues that spawned from the Wolf case, and justly so. I've worked in these conditions. I've been a part of the dissent decrees, which is a judge's order on occupancy and treatment. I've seen the conditions of what segregation housing units do with maladaptive behavior and confinement syndrome. I've watched how individuals have entered inside of a correctional facility with mental health issues that need immediate care, and then how we've diagnosed with others with mental health issues that may not have been known until they had arrived. And then I've actually watched people acquire mental health issues. So this is all important, in the legal considerations and the challenges and the changes that are occurring in corrections today are far better than they were 50 years ago, never mind 100 years ago or 150 years ago. My old facility was located in Worcester. There's a story, and I don't mean to turn this into a lecture, rather just a weekly overview, but my facility was located in Worcester at one point. It's on the outskirts of Worcester, Massachusetts. It was located on a street called Summer Street. And across the street was the Worcester State Hospital. It was where we kept our mentally ill people, whether they were criminally mentally ill or criminally insane, or they were just being sent there by a treating physician. And at the Summer Street jail, there was what they call a trolley. And on that trolley was were three 50-gallon drums. The first 50-gallon drum was empty. And the second drum was with water and a brush. And then the third drum had food in it. Normally that movie prison slot, which doesn't exist anymore. So anyways, inmates, we didn't have proper plumbing back then. So the inmates would take their buckets of their bodily waste and pour it into that empty first drum. Then they would take the bucket and they would brush it out in the water, and then their food would be put in it. And then they would eat out of it and then use it for waste later for the rest of the day. Now, some of you might be cringing at that. That is utterly disgusting, and it opens up inmates and anybody that works in that facility to a variety of different types of diseases, specifically dysentery. And so we can see why the mortality rate in correctional facilities or prisons up to the 1950s and 1960s was so high, because individuals were acquiring communicable diseases and dietary diseases as a result of the conditions, and had every right to pose legal action against the facility or the state demanding changes. With that, I hope you enjoy the rest of this week, and I will be in the discussion area looking for some great answers. And if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Have a great week.